Alright, in this video we're just going to take a few moments to look at some segments and lines within circles or that relate to circles. And we just want to identify some pieces, okay, so that you understand the language and can speak the correct words, and when you hear a word or you see one written, you know what it represents. And once we know what it represents, it's usually pretty easy to put things together logically and figure out a relationship that we might be analyzing. So we'll start with, let's just pretend this is actually a good looking circle. And some things you already know. For example, if we start in the middle of a circle and we go out to one edge, we call that the radius. That's something you should be extremely familiar with by now. Now, if we were to go all the way across the circle and still pass through the middle of it, we call that the diameter. Now, some other ones you may be less familiar with. If you see a segment that goes from one end of a circle to the other end, okay, but notice this one's different than the diameter, it doesn't happen to pass through the center, we call that a chord. Okay? And chords could be really short, they could be really long, they just have to touch two places on the edge of a circle and go straight between them. Okay? And maybe the last one you might not be familiar with would be a segment or a line that is on the outside edge of the circle. And I'm going to try to draw this as best I can. Well, that's not good. Let's go erase that and try again. Okay, if I were to draw a line that comes down and just barely touches the edge of that circle. So let's see if we can use our imagination here and pretend that I actually drew a straight line here. And it just barely touches the edge of that circle, just kind of glances it, and then it just heads on in a straight line. So it just barely touches that edge. We call that a tangent line. Okay, and what tangent really means is right at this point, right at that spot where those two things intersect, this red line basically tells you what the slope of that exact spot is on the edge of the circle. Now, that's a little more complicated than we need to know in geometry, but as we get into some upper level algebra and upper level trigonometry, it becomes kind of a big deal. So what you need to know coming out of this are a few different terms that you're going to see a lot down the road. Okay, tangent line is one of them, and tangent lines are always on the outside of the circle. Okay, they don't ever go through the inside, they just barely touch the outside. Now, what if we did have something that went across, let's say across the top like this, and it barely touched the circle right there? Well, that's just a different tangent line. They're both tangent lines. They're just in different places on the circle. The circle could have infinite number of tangent lines as you work your way around. As long as it barely touches in one spot and moves on, we call it a tangent. So there's a few things you need to recognize from this. Chord, which is kind of weird. It's like diameter, but it never goes through the center, so it's kind of on the edge of the circle, on the outside. Sorry, it's on the inside, but it's near one end of the circle where it touches two pieces of the circle, like this right here, but it never actually goes right through the middle. You got diameter, which you guys are pretty familiar with by now, radius, which you should be really familiar with by now, and tangent lines.